Thanks, Brian. And thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Matt, for being here. As Ryan said, I mean, Matt's background is incredible. I think you've got the past life in politics, and now as the chair of the Climate Change Authority. We're really lucky to have you here to get your insights, and I'm looking forward to it. So we'll be chatting for about half an hour, 45 minutes, half an hour, and there'll be time for questions afterwards. So, and yeah, help yourself to the spread as well. We couldn't have this conversation at a more timely point in time, I think. So obviously what's happening in the Middle East, there's an incredible amount of human tragedy there. But if I may, I'd like to focus on the energy side and what it means here in Australia. We saw the inflation numbers come out yesterday, and clearly it's having an impact on inflation. But if you could just provide some insights into the energy infrastructure here in Australia, the vulnerabilities here, and what you think we need to do.
Well, firstly, Jai, thanks for hosting me here today as I come down to your beautiful city. And it's terrific to be with such a great audience. And I'd like to take the opportunity to acknowledge my CEO from the Climate Change Authority, Kath Rowley, who's here. Kath, give everyone a wave. Kath has recently been appointed as the CEO of Australia's Climate Change Authority. She brings a wealth of experience, is one of the most respected leaders in the Australian public service. And I'm very fortunate to have her supporting me with the work that I do as the chair of Australia's Climate Change Authority in providing frank and fearless advice to the government of the day as to how we can decarbonise our economy in a way that's in the national interest. And I guess to your question, Shai, this is a challenging time, but it doesn't change the destination that we need to reach. And we only saw last week in New Zealand a huge flooding event that is impacting communities and the New Zealand economy. That's on the back of extreme natural disaster events here in Australia. I mean, I was the Treasurer of New South Wales that had to fund the third most expensive natural disaster that the nation had ever seen, and that was the Lismore floods in 2022. For those that say there is no cost, the cost of taking action on climate change is too high, let me tell you, I've had to foot the bill for us not taking action on climate change for too long. And that looked like the worst flooding event in the history of New South Wales, the Lismore floods, which followed the worst bushfire season that the state of New South Wales had ever seen, the Black Summer bushfires. And that followed the worst drought that New South Wales had ever seen. So there is a real economic cost to us not acting on climate change. And at the moment, the good news is that we can still do something about this. The action we take now can not only reduce our emissions, but limit the impact of dangerous climate change. And in doing so, we can also grow the prosperity of our nation. There are technologies available today that can be rolled out at scale that are cheaper than their fossil fuel equivalent. And I'll come to the energy system in a moment, but will deliver cost of living savings for families and businesses and have real environmental impact. So the worst impacts of climate change that our scientists have been telling us will happen for years can be averted. And in doing so, we can actually help families and businesses with cost of living pressures and grow our economy and national prosperity in the long term. So it's a win-win-win by taking strong action on climate change. And that was before the war in Iran. Pulling out some of these technologies has only become more compelling. And I'll use the case of electric vehicles, for example. Every kilometre or every EV that we put on the roads that displace a petrol engine vehicle equivalent is extending our national fuel security, is saving money for people at the bowser. As I said, the total life cost of owning an EV today, and my friends at Tesla will know this only too well, the total life cost of an electric vehicle compared to a combustion engine vehicle equivalent is already better today. That's before the war in Iran. And that difference is becoming greater as petrol prices continue to rise. So every time we drive past the petrol station and wince at the high prices, just remember that by electrifying, we can not only protect ourselves from volatile regions of the world and these fossil fuel impacts, but we can also help protect our planet for future generations. So that's something that we should be taking full advantage of. So as I said, the destination doesn't change. The direction of travel where we need to go to protect our environment and enhance our economy, that doesn't change. It's just the excuses for delay have become harder.
So many kind of ways to take the conversation. And it's interesting because, I mean, on the back of that, I saw that, EV sales jumped to 14% last month. So that's from about 8 or 9%. So clearly public is seeing that. Is that conversation, though, happening at the government level? When I, listen to the radio, for example, I see the point where a lot of the conversation is about fossil fuel security today, to decrease the cost of energy today. But I haven't heard too much about using this crisis as a springboard to really accelerate renewable. Is that happening in the background?
Well, I certainly think that the current national government, has put in place the architecture that we need to get to net zero by 2050. Now, there's more to do, obviously, but you think about a number of the policy levers that have been put in place, the capacity investment scheme to make renewable projects investable for the long term, the vehicle efficiency standards, which will drive the uptake of electric vehicles, the home battery scheme. As of July last year, the subsidies that the government has given has driven over 350,000 households to install a home battery. And that's just since July. So there are a lot of the building blocks in place needed to get to net zero. Do we need to do more? Absolutely. But so far, a lot of policies have been put in place. Now, to your point around the current debate, there's a saying in politics, never waste a crisis. And it gives me no pleasure to see motorists feeling real pain every time they fill up at the Bowser. It gives me no pleasure to see our farmers struggling to get fertilizer. But what that does is underscores the need to transition our economy further and faster. Because we know that by owning an EV, you're not going to be faced with that bill shock you get when you're filling up at the Bowser. People are voting with their feet because it makes economic sense. Just look at rooftop solar uptake in this country. We've got the highest penetration of rooftop solar anywhere on the planet. Now, it's not just woke greenies that are putting solar on their rooftops. It's everyone across the community because people know that it makes economic sense to do it. From the curmudgeonly Sky News watcher, they've got solar panels on their roof because they know the economics stack up. And that's increasingly becoming the case as the economics of different technologies improves. And that's why we're seeing a big uptake in EVs at the moment.
And I mean, on technology in our global fund, just a little plug there, but we're invested in a company called Bloom Energy, and it's incredible how their technology is used to power AI data centers in the US. And the growth there has been phenomenal because it's a more sustainable option when compared to natural gas or coal or any of the other options. It can provide base load. Earnings is increasing 10x. So from an investor's perspective, we definitely see that it's not a compromise. You can have it both. You can have sustainability and you can have earnings growth and growth for shareholders and investors.
Well, you're spot on. I mean, necessity is the mother of all invention. Yeah. And right now, the price of diesel, the price of fossil fuels is increasing, and that's driving a lot of innovation. And we'll increasingly see that's being housed. So what we need to continue that innovation is policy certainty. And that's something that I've argued for as a minister in a coalition government, as now the independent chair of the Climate Change Forum. If you put the policy settings in place, investors, the community, business, they will work out what the rules are and make sure that they're taking advantage of the direction of traffic.
So what's the bottleneck here? In that I can look to the US and say AI data center investment, which is so energy hungry, is forced the investors to look for alternative forms of energy. And that's, and in a way, our view is that in a way that's driven the growth in renewables and these forward-looking technology companies that are finding solutions to the climate crisis. That's happening there. Here, are we going to see something similar here? Is that what we need to get AI investment here? So that's going to increase the demand of electricity, and then you see innovation coming through. And if you think about for renewable deployment, you just need capital going into that space, or is it more of a policy issue and we need to fix that policy first in order to get that acceleration in that transition?
Well, I think government has a really important role to play in setting the direction of travel and the policy frameworks to drive private capital, private enterprise to where the nation needs to go. I mean, take, for example, what we did in New South Wales. We knew that over the next decade, 4 of the state's coal-fired power stations were coming to the end of technical life. And what we needed to do was drive investments and the build of replacement capacity into the grid. So we put in place investable frameworks, said what the rules are, we said where we were trying to get to, and we delivered that policy certainty. One of the most important things we did was we legislated the policies that we wanted to see put in place with the support not only of my party, the Liberal Party, but we had the National Party at the table who signed up to it. And then I worked across the aisle. I worked with the Labor members of the Parliament. I worked with the Greens. I worked with the Independents. And we legislated the biggest renewable energy package in the nation's history with multi-partisan support. Now, why does that matter? Matters because it's investable. Those policies that the coalition government in New South Wales put in place are the policies the current Labor government in New South Wales is following. So it doesn't matter what the gyrations are of the political system. You as investors know that that's going to be the roadmap. You can deploy your capital and know that there's not going to be some huge shift in the direction of travel. And I think that's really important. That's the first thing I'd say. Policy certainty. We don't need zigzags. We don't need U-turns. That will lead to a more costly transition for capital and also for consumers. So that's one thing that I'm always advocating for, policy certainty. But a few of the other things that we need to be conscious of are the bottlenecks along the journey. When it comes to renewable energy, we know that the planning system needs reform. You need to make it simpler and easier to get approvals or to get a fast no freeze out. That's one of the things that chills the investment of capital. And if we're not an attractive destination for that capital, well, let me tell you, there's a global arms race underway at the moment, and that capital will fly to jurisdictions that make it more attractive. Again, coming back to the original point, policy certainty, making sure that we remove some of the barriers to getting capital deployed, projects built, would be something that I'd want to see if I was still in the chair of in the role of as an energy minister in this country.
Interesting. You know, we've got a venture strategy, and we're talking to a startup that was telling me, the CEO is telling me that it's so hard to get large scale projects up and running. And so what's happening is you're having these smaller scale projects getting off the ground. And this company's come in and created a software solution that combines all the small scale batteries to then get to the same outcome as one large scale battery project. Inefficiency in that, right? There must be an efficiency in that. And the bottleneck there is around policy. It's incredibly difficult to get this big projects up.
Well, I mean, this is not just a challenge that the energy transition has. This is true for all mega infrastructure around the nation, right around the globe at the moment. Major infrastructure projects are taking much longer to deliver and are blowing out in costs. Now, that's the same for metros. So the metro system in Sydney, those projects are way over time and over budget. So it's not just energy infrastructure that's facing this challenge. The big challenge with energy infrastructure is that the rest of the world is trying to do this all at once. So a lot of those utility scale projects are being delayed and they're more costly. That's providing opportunities for more nimble players to be able to fill the gaps. And from an investor perspective, my advice would be is to focus on that enabling critical infrastructure that's going to be needed if policies speed up or slow down when it comes to the challenge of meeting climate change. So what does that look like? Transmission lines, firming infrastructure, things that are going to be needless regardless of whether the transition speeds up or slow down. And I was just interested when I came in speaking to Neil, who was talking about his project of batteries, so firming infrastructure, sub 1 megawatt, I think it was.
Yeah. 1 megawatt plus.
1 megawatt plus, and not trying to plug Neil's project, but because of the challenge in deploying the utility scale infrastructure, there's an opportunity for capacity to be installed very quickly, a speed to market play, using C&I customers. 101 megawatt batteries is the same as one 100 megawatt battery if it's deployed in the world. Again, innovation, entrepreneurs will see the market opening and get in there. And we need to make sure that we've got the policies and the framework those to enable that to happen. And the other thing I'd say is that, augmenting the existing grid and using the existing infrastructure may be a better outcome for consumers than building huge new transmission lines and generation. I'm not saying we shouldn't do that. I'm saying that we should be looking at what is going to deliver the cheapest result for consumers as part of this transition. And that will change as the economics changes. Certainly in the New South Wales context, we have 5 renewable energy zones. When the government agreed to those renewable energy zones, the cost of delivery and the timeframes around that delivery was very different to what it is now. Now, I'm no longer in government, but we should always be looking to see how we will deliver things better and faster and in the interest of consumers. And if the facts change, we should be looking to make sure that consumers are able to benefit from that. Take, for example, nimble projects like behind the meter batteries using C&I.
On that, Professor Sarah Legacy, who works with us, and she's also the chair of the Biodiversity Council, they've done a lot of work on looking at our current energy infrastructure. And her view is that we can have an energy system that is renewable and good for nature and without decreasing or increasing costs to consumers. So, they've done a lot of modeling on that space, and I mean, I was, encouraged to see that finding. But is it harder in Australia because of our background in resources and history there?
I don't think so. I think we need innovative policy to make sure that we can get the best outcome for the community, for the environment, and for the economy when it comes to this energy transition or this broader transition to a low carbon economy. So that requires us to constantly be looking at the technologies that are available, how we deploy them, how we get them built, whilst at the same time maintaining the social license. So public policy is not set and forget. It's requiring constant attention to make sure that we're delivering for the community, for the economy, and for the environment. That's something that I try to do in public office, and I'll continue to try to do with Kath in our role at the Climate Change.
Perhaps you could talk a little bit more about your role and what you're prioritizing right now.
Yeah, sure. Well, Jai, as some of your guests may know, I'm a recovering politician. I served for 14 years in the New South Wales Parliament. That's why I have no hair. But I had the enormous privilege of being the state's Energy and Environment Minister. Gladys Berejiklian appointed me to that role. I thought I'd upset her. I thought, what have I ever done to you? This was after the Liberal Party was tearing itself apart. Climate policy, Malcolm had just been taken out as the Prime Minister. So it was a really challenging time. But my focus was trying to find common ground within the coalition, trying to find common ground across the Parliament of things that we could all agree on, and coming up with policy solutions that could meet those challenges. And what was that common ground? Well, how do we hand our planet to our kids better than we found it? And how do we hand our economy to the next generation stronger and more prosperous than we found it? So that's what I did in politics. The people of New South Wales saw fit to change governments. And I was on the train home one day and I got a phone call from Minister Bowen. And he said, "Can you talk?" I said, "I'm on the train." He said, "Can you get off?" And I'm thinking, have I said something? I've done something to upset this guy. I got off, huddled on Chatswood Station in Sydney's North Shore. And he said, "We want to appoint you to chair Australia's Climate Change Authority." I said, "I'm on the other team, don't you?" And he said, "That's exactly why we want you." I thought that's a smart move, but not for the reasons most people think. We need to show that climate policy is all of our challenge. It's not a red team, blue team thing. It's everyone's challenge. I want to work with people right across the political system, right across the community who want to try and achieve those objectives I outlined, handing our planet to our kids better than we found. We know there are huge challenges, but we also know that we can do something about it. But also, in doing something about it, you can also drive investment into this country, create new long-term sustainable well-paid jobs, particularly in the regions, and underwrite a new era of economic prosperity for our nation. That's the chance. When there's no country better place to win in a low-carbon economy than Australia. It's got an abundance of renewable resources. We've got a periodic table of critical minerals below our feet. This is Australia's chance to shine. And we can't let vested interests, we can't let populists hold Australia back from this enormous opportunity, because it's not them that are going to be paying the bill for it. It's our kids and their kids and their kids. And I think we've got a collective responsibility to make sure that we win a better future for them. And that's something that I'm certainly trying to do. And it's great working with Kath, who's committed herself to this for many years. And I know many of you in this room that are investing in this space, that are playing in this space. And my message to you is, don't be diverted by the noise out there. The direction of travel is clear. This transition across the global economy is happening whether Barnaby Joyce likes it or not, because the economics make sense. The technologies are changing, and the markets that have underwritten Australia's prosperity for generations want different products. And we're really well placed to serve those needs in a low carbon future. So let's go.
Just touched on AI briefly before. And our view is that those investments are going to come here soon. If they haven't, they're starting to get here already, and that's shown some pressure on the grid and our infrastructure, but it's not as visible as it is in the US. So we need to act. Not that we don't need to act now from an environmental perspective, but from a capital perspective, from a technology perspective, it feels like it's even more important now. And on top of that, we've got geopolitics, right? So perhaps if you could talk a little bit more about how you see AI coming together in this space.
Well, the first thing is, I think AI presents an enormous opportunity for Australia. I mean, it's a great place to locate island nation, a lot of the infrastructure that's needed. So it's a safe place to store data. That means that we should be attracting a lot of capital to build the data centers and the infrastructure around it. That's a great opportunity for Australia. But it can't come at the expense of the community social license when it comes to the energy transition. I don't want to see a situation where scarce energy is preferred for data centers over mums and dads in the suburbs. So we need to get the balance right here. We need to build the infrastructure that safeguards families and businesses from huge bill shocks that could come if our supply doesn't keep up with the demand for energy. And that's why one of the things that I'd like to see the data industry thinking about is how they can turn up with their own energy that protects consumers in the broader system from those supply-demand challenges. For data centers that bring their own behind-the-meter solution, bring their own, I think they should be preferred for that kind of example. I think that would be a safe place for those investors to play. And not just because of the political challenges. And we're seeing those political challenges in the United States. Trump has already said that data centers, he'll limit their ability to pull energy out of the grid, and he'll prefer those data centers that turn up with their own energy supply, because he does want to protect consumers. If consumers revolt because energy prices are too high, because data centers are draining the grid, that's going to be a terrible outcome for everyone, and politicians will act. So I think data centers have a responsibility for their own businesses, and also to ensure that we maintain the social license for that investment in this nation to do their bit to help us with the energy supply. That load can underpin new investment in additional supply. So we need to be having clever policy and innovative ideas from the data industry as to how we can get it done.
Is that happening now?
So I think some of the big players are starting to be alert to those social license challenges. I mean, the last thing they want is government coming in and regulating them or limiting their ability to operate in this country. So I think that we should be looking to see how more data centers can help our energy transition rather than hinder it, and maintaining that social license.
So I think the takeaway there is policy, capital, and innovation. Thanks you, Matt. That was fantastic.
We're going to open up.
Yeah, open up to questions. And Brian, can swell. Keep people out.
Exactly. So from the questions, so please just raise your hand.
Absolutely.
Actually, ask you a question.
As I said this morning at the CEDA conference, I mean, the idea of, during a fossil fuel crisis, doubling down on fossil fuels, that just seems like, trying to fix a gambling debt by going back down to the casino. Let's put this into perspective. The best thing we can do to extend our fuel reserves is to move as many vehicles as possible from combustion engine vehicles to electric vehicles. It's not building new reserves. It's not digging new holes. It's transitioning away from relying on fossil fuels so that we can preserve the fossil fuels that we have for those hard to abate sectors, those parts of the community that can't plug in. So for every EV we get on the road, we're saving litres of diesel and petrol for our farmers, for our truckies, for remote and regional communities that can't plug into the grid. In my view, that's the best way to create long-term sustainability and fuel security, not continuing to rely on volatile parts of the world and volatile fossil fuels. I mean, we've known for a long time that fossil fuels lead to climate instability. Well, now in live time, we're seeing how they lead to economic instability as well. So, as I said at the start, the direction of travel hasn't changed. The excuses for delay have become harder and harder to manufacture. So we should get on with the electrification and the decarbonisation of our agenda. This is not just a climate issue anymore. This is not just a cost of living issue anymore. It's now a national energy sovereignty issue. And that's why we need to double down on the transition. It's not my job to be a political commentator, but what is my job is to provide frank and fearless advice to the government of the day about how we can get on with the decarbonisation. What I will say is that this government has put in place significant architecture that will help us get to net zero by 2050. And I said that at the start. We've got the capacity investment scheme, you've got the vehicle efficiency standards, you've got a lot of mechanisms to drive uptake of EVs. You mentioned in Melbourne, the suburbs, you're not seeing EVs. Well, it's Sydney, it's kind of the opposite. It's the outer suburban belt that has really driven the uptake of EVs, largely because they're doing more driving. And there's been maybe some state government supports as well that have basically closed the gap between combustion engine vehicle and the EV equivalent. So that's not the story in Sydney, that's for sure. As for the current issue, I think that you've got to look at the substance and the noise. You mentioned before the New South Wales government saying they're going to explore for gas in Western New South Wales. Let me tell you, that sounds like a political fig leaf to get through a short-term crisis. It's not going to change anything. If the economics of exploring for gas in New South Wales stacked up, let me tell you, it would have been done already. Okay, Narrabri, which is approved, which is a coal seam gas well in the north west of New South Wales, that was approved 5 years ago. You haven't seen a single petajoule of gas come out of that project. Why? Because the economics don't stack up now, and they're increasingly getting worse as batteries and renewables become even more compelling when it comes to the economics. So I think you'll see a lot of noise, people trying to manage the short-term crisis, but the real substance is in the policies that we're already seeing being built upon that will help with families and businesses around cost of living. I mean, rooftop solar, utility scale, renewable generation, EVs, all these things are seeing big uptakes because it's compelling to mums and dads in the suburbs, and the government is providing clear direction and support for those things. So I think there's a difference between the short-term noise at the moment and the long-term policy substance. And the policy substance for the long-term this government has put in place is very clearly heading in one direction. And I will continue. We've just been at CEDA today, Gaff, where we've been arguing this exact point. Now is the time to double down on the transition because the war in the Middle East makes it even more compelling from an economics.
Time for just two more questions.
I'm President of Bush Heritage Australia, and also was previously a director of CDC data centers. So like my world's colliding a little bit here. So thank you, Matt. So my question is, so data centers that you're talking about behind the meter and the need for energy. The path for data centres will mean that they have very big energy requirements and still need to be through population. This means that they're going to need to have access to utility scale with sunshines and renewables, which means they need transmission.
Yeah.
And the choke point at the moment is transmission. And that is having real social license problems. And I know anecdotally where, one, there's big opposition to the transmission line because the people on the properties that have the transmission line are getting the revenue, but no one on, whereas that's how they solve with wind energy to sort of share the benefit. Given the importance of having the transmission line to these renewable energy sites, have you got any thoughts about what needs to be done to improve that social licence and improve the rollout? And we'll plan to.
Well, I'll share this anecdote. So when I was the Energy Minister in New South Wales, Matt Kean approved Snowy 2.0, but forgot to plug it in. So we needed to build a transmission line called HumeLink. Some of you will be familiar with that project. It was very controversial down in Wagga Wagga, sort of down in the southeast of the state. And I went down there and they were very angry at me as the minister. And when I was speaking to a number of the farmers, and I'm not saying this is representative of everyone, but the message I got was that the price of hosting that infrastructure was way too low. The compensation that landowners were given was way too low. It was something like $5,000 a kilometre. We came back to Sydney and I asked my department to investigate what the impact on consumer bills would be if we upped it to $250,000 a kilometre. It was something like 3 cents to consumer bills, but the offset savings through lower wholesale prices is about $120, so more than net off the impact. So we changed the rules in New South Wales that meant that if you hosted the infrastructure, you went from $5,000 a kilometre to $250,000 a kilometre. A number of farmers that were implacably opposed knocked on our door and said, we think we can do it for the nation. So I tell that story to say, look, that really underscored to me, you need to work with community, you need to listen to community, you need to understand that, and government needs to come up with innovative policy ideas to deal with those challenges. And you're right, if you're getting that revenue stream, you may be more open to hosting the infrastructure. But if you're next door and you're not getting the revenue stream, and all of a sudden your amenity is being cut in half by transmission lines, you may not be too happy about it. I think that the wind industry dealt with this quite well in the mid-2000s, whereby if you hosted the infrastructure, you got an annuity, but if you had a line of sight to the infrastructure, you also got a payment. So I think government policymakers need to go back and think about how they can share the benefits more broadly. One of the things we did in the renewable energy policy in New South Wales, we had community sharing benefit schemes whereby proponents, developers put money into a giant pool that then got distributed to communities. That didn't necessarily address the things you're talking about, Sue, but when communities started seeing upgrades to sporting fields and clubs and swimming pools and things like that, they could see that there was direct benefit coming into their community because of the energy transition. And I think we need to get better at ensuring those revenue, those opportunities flow to rural and regional Australia so that we all share the benefits of this transition.
And thanks so much, Matt. That was insightful and I learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone here also learned a lot.